The Eyes of Texas used to be a popular folk tune, but today the song could be about other eyes, the eyes of a spy machine. We live in the United States of surveillance, with cameras like these increasingly positioned on street corners and with much more invisible spying online and on the phone. Anyone who's paying attention knows that privacy could be out the window. That's what former newspaper editor Bill Kovich says.
I think the idea of privacy is gone. I think you have to adjust to the fact that somebody somewhere may be watching what you're doing, and it may not be the government. It may be General Motors. It may be General Telephone and Telegraph. It may be the drugstore on the corner.
All of this is not happening by accident. Well-funded, powerful agencies and companies are engaged in the business of keeping tabs on what we do, what we say, and what we think. Mass surveillance is the focus of this new 6-part investigative documentary series, examining who is watching whom and why. Some Americans are up in arms, including an internet entrepreneur who says government spying could be a first step towards a police state, Alfredo Lopez.
Let me put it this way. There is in the United States all the technology, from drones to computers to surveillance to day-to-day camera surveillance all over the country. There is a structure and apparatus for a police state. The United States is not a police state. That is clear. We are not that. There I draw the line. But we can be. And we can be with a flip of a switch. And the real problem is, I'm not sure that the people of this country have not become sufficiently unconscious of their rights and of the Constitution and the purpose of the Constitution to really put a halt to that when it starts. And so, that's the real battle.
Others believe spying is now a big industry, more about money allocated out of fear than stopping terrorism. Sam Antar is a convicted felon who says there's a corporate angle.
It's a bigger story than the NSA story. It's really corporate surveillance of critics or corporate surveillance of rivals within their own corporations. In other words, executives surveilling rival executives.
These companies are looking for the Edward Snowdens in their own world.
Yes.
To many in the world today, the face of America has a big nose for sniffing and sifting mountains of data, phone calls, emails, and texts, and with many mouths silenced by paranoia to keep what they decide is secret, secret. Even high-tech sector executives are deeply troubled.
I'm incredibly disappointed. Truthfully, I had become disappointed over the last couple of years. I strongly had suspected this, like many others, that this was happening. But what I had not realized is that actually now we've created a situation where all commerce is unsafe, all communications are unsafe. The most things that we had expected to be actually have some level of protection, completely eviscerated.
Just like Toys R Us is one of our biggest stores for kids, Secrets R Us has become an American obsession and now an explosive and divisive issue that affects people all over the world.
It's important that the U.S. is embarrassed by this because there isn't a way around it. They should stop it. They should stop and desist. They should sign a treaty saying they will not conduct cyber war. They should sign a treaty saying they will respect the human rights of the whole world.
Taken together, America has become a surveillance industrial state where everyone's business has become its business and where one huge U.S. intelligence agency has been given the sanction and unlimited amounts of money to spy on the whole world. In this series, you'll meet a former undercover FBI agent who says government spying is out of control.
We want the intelligence agencies and the law enforcement agencies to have power to go after people who are doing harm. But these programs are being done regardless of any suspicion of wrongdoing.
and a computer whiz who did the same kind of specialized secret work that whistleblower Edward Snowden did, but for the military.
Well, I mean, when you work for the government, you're like, hey, I'm here to do a job. You know, and at the end of the day, go home and make sure the job's gotten done right. And it's really that simple. And the federal government has a lot of really outstanding people that work for it. I mean, high-end, high level. They wake up dedicated to make sure that it's done to the highest level you can imagine. But sometimes you just have people that just do their thing. You know, they become upset with what they see.
You will also hear from Edward Snowden's personal lawyer, who says that his leaks to the public were leaks of conscience.
You know, Edward Snowden has no desire to harm his country in any way. He believes that he's still on the side of his former colleagues, but they just don't see that. We've tilted too far in the direction of collecting information on innocent people.
At the same time, writer Andy Greenberg of Wired magazine says Snowden's revelations are leading to reform.
It seems that he's their worst nightmare, a kind of genius employee gone rogue. What I do see that's kind of remarkable is that his leaks are already starting to inspire reforms. Even as the government, the Department of Justice, calls for his imprisonment, the president himself is talking about how the NSA needs to be reformed based on what he's released.
Going forward, I'm directing the Director of National Intelligence, in consultation with the Attorney General, to annually review, for the purposes of declassification, any future opinions of the court with broad privacy implications, and to report to me and to Congress on these efforts.
Stopping mass surveillance is also an issue that is building in intensity.
I cannot stand this anymore. I can't. As a mother, as a daughter, I cannot try to explain this situation to my children.
This is an effort that's uniting strange bedfellows from across the political spectrum. I'm proud to sound here with Democrats, with Republicans, with progressives, with libertarians, because this is not about right and left. This is about right and wrong.
In this series, we'll tell you what NSA really does, how it works with telecom and internet companies, and the threat it poses to a free press and democratic values.
It's not only a violation of freedom of the press, it's a violation of the public's right to know. Information is the oxygen of a democracy. It's not just about participating in democratic processes. It's about being informed. That's what makes democracy meaningful. And when we don't have that information, when a very powerful entity, the government, has the information and the people don't, that is not a very healthy sign.
We will also show you how whistleblowers, hackers, and activists are fighting back and winning support worldwide.
There's been a kind of cat and mouse game between the surveillers and the surveilled that's been going on for decades. And what WikiLeaks, I think, was the first to show is that the mice can have some small or even large victories despite their lack of resources. Now, we see that the cats have cracked down again and that the surveillance state has responded. But then Snowden, appeared as another win for the mice. So, I think that this is going to continue, these sort of, a kind of tit for tat. But it does seem that these revelations by the mice, these moments when we learn, when transparency wins out over secrecy, essentially, are getting bigger over time.
Even as protests mount, the United States government still supports a vast cyber spying program.
What I've been very clear about is that there has to be a narrow purpose to it, not a broad-based purpose, but it's rather based on a specific concern around terrorism or counterproliferation or human trafficking or something that I think all of us would say has to be pursued.
President Obama has called for some minor reforms, but critics are not satisfied.
There's some things that I actually like about Barack Obama, but I'm clear about the fact that politically he is my opponent, he's my enemy, and he is clear about the fact that you have to put into place a series of controls that will preserve the social order. That's the only purpose for this stuff.
Many in the media have been challenging the power of the surveillance state too, relying on leaks because they can't always get access to insiders who are afraid to speak. The NSA has invited some journalists in, like for this pro-NSA CBS 60 Minutes report.
The agency gave 60 Minutes unprecedented access to NSA headquarters, where we were able to speak to employees who have never spoken publicly before. Full disclosure, I once worked in the office of the Director of National Intelligence, where I saw firsthand how secretly the NSA operates.
Senior correspondent John Miller later left the network to join the New York Police Department as an intelligence official. Miller asked some softball questions, ostensibly trying to understand what the NSA does and doesn't do.
You don't hear the calls.
You don't hear the call.
You don't see the name.
You don't see the names.
You just see this number called that number.
This number, the to from number, the duration of the call, and the date time group. That's all you get. And all we can do is tell the FBI that number is talking to somebody who is very bad. You ought to go look at it.
Later, a widely read website showcased another interview by HBO comedian John Oliver asking, what does it say about the U.S. press that the toughest interview Keith Alexander has is from a comedian?
It's been said that your motto was collect everything. Is that true?
For specific problems.
Right. But you do understand that collect everything is also the motto of a hoarder. That's the fundamental principle which ends up with someone living alongside 1,500 copies of newspapers from the 1950s and 6 mummified cats.
Former officials like General Alexander were off limits to our series, as Vanny Vines of the NSA made clear, rejecting our requests for a tour. Thank you for writing. Given the volume of such media requests, we can't assist you at this time with your project. The NSA had been created in secret and designed to be invisible, although it's hard to hide more than 30,000 employees with a vast number of buildings. Their tightly guarded headquarters here in Maryland covers more than 325 acres. They have a small army to protect it from enemies, foreign and domestic, as well as their own fire department and SWAT team. Yet these days, you don't have to get on the inside for a stage tour of the NSA to know what's happening. And that's thanks to the whistleblower they're all paranoid about. One man, former contractor Edward Snowden alone, is suspected of making off with millions of documents that we have only seen a fraction of. He's been called an insider threat.
I'm just another guy who sits there day to day in the office, watches what's happening, and goes, this is something that's not our place to decide. The public needs to decide whether these programs and policies are right or wrong.
In a recent appearance for TED, an organization that features diverse speakers, Snowden said he would do it all again, despite his notoriety and the charges against him.
And I want to make it very clear that I did not do this to be safe. I did this to do what was right. And I'm not going to stop my work in the public interest just to benefit myself.
NSA Deputy Director Rick Legend later condemned Snowden at another TED Talk.
I do not like the way that he did it. I think there were a number of other ways that he could have done that would have not endangered our people and the people of other nations through losing visibility into what our adversaries are doing. But I do think it's an important conversation.
Snowden's secret files have sparked a global controversy and debate about the role of American surveillance that seems to have the world as its target. It has fueled debates in almost every country.
They're damaging here in the United States because people obviously know what the government is doing. But the damage done internationally is spectacular. Not only did they get a lot of governments really upset with them, that they can patch over. But masses of people throughout the world know that the United States government is surveilling them. And this is a major, major problem for them.
Much of the focus of public anger is directed at this vast agency known by its three initials, NSA, the National Security Agency, also called a shadow factory or an enigma wrapped in a riddle. The author of this book, journalist James Bamford, has even made a documentary about the NSA for a public TV science series.
For those in the know, the joke was always that NSA stood for no such agency. For those on the inside, the joke was that NSA stood for never say anything.
Bamford and a small army of critics are now dueling with former NSA officials and their defenders. Lawyer Robert Litt works for the Director of National Intelligence and downplays the dangers of the NSA.
The intelligence community and the executive branch is subject to significant accountability. We have accountability to the Congress. People may question whether that accountability is good enough, whether it's structured properly, but we still have a degree of accountability, and the president, of course, is ultimately accountable to the public.
The NSA is trying to convince the public that it's not dangerous, but at the same time it's become obsessed with dangers within, a so-called insider compromise that is now consuming their attention. In the post-Snowden period, the U.S. government is facing a big problem internally to deal with what they call insider threats. As many as 4,000 people they suspect of perhaps getting involved in leaking documents or being an insider threat. On the other hand, they have a problem from Congress and the media, which is denouncing the NSA and denouncing surveillance. So they've come up with a new term and a new program. It's in this report here, National Security Through Responsible Information Sharing. Now, what does that mean? It's not really clear, but the idea is to coordinate the intelligence community and to have the people in Washington linked up to the people at the local level, even at the tribal level, on Indian reservations to try to create an integrated police state apparatus. At least it could be used for that, although right now it's just for responsible information sharing. And one of the things about this book that I found interesting was the acronyms, the nicknames of all the organizations that are part of this network. 6 pages of acronyms of organizations in the responsible information sharing environment. To explore the mentality of analysts and tech wizards who do the same work that Snowden did, we met Brad Sumrall, a darknet programmer and former military intelligence contractor. You were, in a way, doing what Ed Snowden was doing at one point. Can you tell us about that?
Basically the exact same job. I mean, depending on what government building you're in, I mean, it's still the same thing. It's the same rack of servers. You still have the SIPR net there. You have the regular garrison internet. If you went out into the field, you have the tactical internets or networks.
So when Snowden was monitoring information of various kinds, he had, I guess, clearances. Did you have clearances as well?
Mm-hmm. Yep, and he's on the SIPR net.
So in doing all of that stuff, were you very conscious of the material that you were dealing with being of a high security nature?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, you have all the sensitive databases right there.
Even as intelligence agencies try to keep their staffs in line, reporters have become another enemy and maybe a bigger threat, with many hard-hitting reports winning major media prizes and pitting leaders of the mainstream press against the lack of transparency by the NSA.
He said awarding the Pulitzer to Snowden enablers is a disgrace. Anything you'd like to say back to him about that?
You know, I mean, I look at Peter King's condemnation as an enormous badge of honor.
Why shouldn't you, Mr. Greenwald, be charged with a crime?
The scandal that arose in Washington before our stories began was about the fact that the Obama administration is trying to criminalize investigative journalism by going through the emails and phone records of AP reporters, accusing a Fox News journalist of the theory that you just embraced, being a co-conspirator with felonies for working with sources. If you want to embrace that theory, it means that every investigative journalist in the United States who works with their sources, who receives classified information, is a criminal. And it's precisely those theories and precisely that climate that has become so menacing in the United States. It's why the New Yorker's Jane Mayer said investigative reporting has come to a standstill.
What do you say to those journalists that have been also
highly critical of this kind of reporting on the Edward Snowden
outrageous. Yeah,
revelations. People like David Gregory that are asking if Glenn Greenwald should be prosecuted.
It's outrageous. I don't know how he can call himself a journalist and talk like that. I mean, look, this is the job. I mean, the job is we're supposed to report the truth. If whistleblowers come forward, we're supposed to take the risk along with those whistleblowers. And society long ago decided that we're supposed to have protections when we do this.
This is what journalism is about, shining a light on what the most powerful people in the country are doing to them in the dark. So we're going to continue to do that no matter what David Gregory and his friends say.
This series will take you to a high-level media summit held inside the New York Times that debated the role of leaks and the need to defend the press.
Well, I think there is a need for pushback. This conference is a step in that direction, and there are reporters and even mainstream news organizations that are pushing back. So there's an important fight going on here.
The NSA could not have access to as high a volume of emails and communications without the full cooperation of telecom companies and internet providers. This relationship has blossomed into a surveillance industrial complex with a flow of personnel back and forth between the NSA and its contractors.
As the internet expanded, corporations, I think, saw the possibility of making huge profits and really jumped into it very, very aggressively. But the important thing to note is that the real heavy-duty corporate involvement in the internet is only about 6 or 7 years old. That's when they really swept in.
Events like 9/11 enabled the NSA to grow into a $60 billion enterprise, with 70% or $42 billion going to contractors, some led by former NSA executives. In October 2001, the NSA had only given 55 contracts to 144 contractors. By October 2003, that number had grown to 7,197 contracts for 4,388 companies. Snowden had been an NSA employee who left to work for a company called Booz Allen Hamilton, run in part by a former NSA director. Private companies like these were given access to the NSA's top secrets. This also led to an expansion of spying, even as government studies found that the FBI and CIA screwed up by not applying the intelligence they had but couldn't process to stopping 9/11. Under pressure from President Bush and Vice President Cheney, the agencies decided that traditional legal restraints no longer mattered.
So immediately after 9/11, it was somewhat shocking to me that there was a general feeling that was being expressed that the rules didn't matter anymore, that the FBI had been unleashed, and we were now allowed to investigate who we want and not worry about the legal restraints. And it concerned me greatly because I knew from the history of the FBI that that would lead the FBI into a dangerous area that was going to impact the civil liberties of innocent people and not improve security, in fact, even harm security. And I think that's essentially what's happened.
Keep in mind, the Patriot Act is what allowed them to grow. They were so, kind of insignificant. They did so few little things, but then all of a sudden they became the #1 with a big, fat check.
In addition to their huge budgets, technological supremacy, and backing from key politicians who are supposed to exercise oversight, NSA had always counted on support from a fearful public. That's changing, says attorney Ben Weisner of the ACLU.
I think they're so used to getting their way, they're so used to being able to invoke the threat of terrorism and having everybody roll over, that they're surprised by this environment where those kinds of dangerous threats are not scaring the public into submission. But ultimately this is about what they do and not what they say. And I don't think that there is a great defense.
No, nothing new for me, because back in the 1980s it was common knowledge that the NSA was using many of the same tools that it's alleged or it's come out to have been using today.
Why do you think that is? Why are they doing what they're doing?
It's not an ideological issue, because you have Democratic presidents, you have Republican presidents, you have the far left, the far right. They all agree on one thing. We all want to know what everybody else is doing.
So spying is in our gene pool.
Yeah, spying is in the American gene pool, unfortunately.
Coming up next.
We're here at the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. There are more spies here in D.C. than anywhere else in the world, so it's appropriate that we have this institution that really tells the complete story of espionage internationally.
When you travel to America's capital, Washington, D.C., if you can afford the admission, you can visit this International Spy Museum to relive the glories of the Cold War, complete with an exhibit on James Bond's evil adversaries. What you won't find is any reference to the current surveillance spying scandal.
The key aspects of espionage, that deception, that art of hiding information and disclosing information, really has remained the same.
And this is the capital of it, Washington, D.C.
Absolutely. Washington, D.C. is certainly the capital of espionage.
And the capital of deception in many ways.
Yes, absolutely.
Outside of Washington, in the Maryland suburbs, is the capital of that capital.
Merge onto K9 Road, then your destination will be on the left.
The National Security Agency. This super secret spy agency is not hospitable to tourists or most reporters who want to know what's happening now. We found that out when we were told we were not welcome at this heavily guarded federal facility. It has more than 30,000 employees, 32 miles of roads across 325 acres. We were threatened with a $500 fine for even asking about entering, although later the NSA gave us some footage. These students at a nearby local university were threatened with arrest for photographing an NSA building on their campus where whistleblower Ed Snowden once worked. NSA used to stand for Never Say Anything. This has changed because the surveillance state is in the news every day. Americans know it exists, but few really understand what it does and how. To find out, also, don't bother visiting the NSA website.
I'm often asked the question, what's more important, civil liberties or national security? It's a false question. It's a false choice. At the end of the day, we must do both.
You will only find out what they want you to know, that they are here to defend and protect you. They claim to be accountable in legal and moral terms.
We have to find the way to ensure that we support the entirety of the Constitution. That was the intention of the framers of the Constitution. That's what we do on a daily basis at the National Security Agency.
How true is that? We will investigate the claims and the realities in this episode of America's Surveillance State. What does the NSA do? It's a simple question, but because it's a top-secret agency, a clear understanding has been hard to grasp. The agency is not required to release even non-classified information. On November 6, 1998, NSA for the first time declassified this organization chart of its operations directorate. You'll note some of this document is blacked out. It also only shows part of NSA's mission, including military support, intelligence oversight and policy, global issues and military production, and here, what they call collection operations. That's another word for electronic eavesdropping. It has become well known but also controversial because of all the data that is being collected and stored.
You have this incredible advances in technology that enable much more collection than ever was possible, and an increase of secrecy around the program. So it's very unclear still, not just what the government is doing, but what legal authorities it thinks allows it to do what it's doing.
Mike German, a veteran undercover FBI agent, knows surveillance techniques because he's used them.
It's an enormous problem for the government to know more about the people than the people know about what the government's doing. And what we've seen since the terrorist attacks of 9/11 is that a lot of the legal restraints that kept the government in check after a previous era of abuse were relaxed or removed completely in many cases.
The NSA was created secretly 60 years ago, not by Congress, but by the president, as a tool of the Cold War. But it always got less attention than the spooks, spies, and assassins who built the CIA's mystique as the invulnerable and omnipotent overthrower of governments and silencer of America's enemies. CIA scandals, including a recently leaked document detailing its role in torture and abuse, became well known, even as the NSA's better funded operations were downplayed because they were considered the province of super nerds, boys with toys like satellites, cables, and supercomputers. NSA hires more mathematicians than any other federal agency. Ray McGovern was in the CIA and rose to become a briefer of presidents. He worked for 7 presidents and 9 directors of Central Intelligence. He says he joined because he believed in the mission.
The ethos of intelligence work that attracted me was symbolized by the scriptural quote on the foyer of the CIA's new building. It was new in 1963 when I came on under John Kennedy, and it said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." Okay, and I said, looked at that, and I remembered the constant dictum of my Irish grandmother: be truthful and honest, and then you won't give a damn what anyone says about you. Okay, and so I looked at it and I said, Grandma, if that's true, no pun intended, it's going to be a good place to work.
Eventually, like many professionals, he became disillusioned, retiring early. As a member of the intelligence community, he came to know the NSA's work well.
NSA did play a role. We learned things about the Soviet Union we never would have known before. It was done with judiciousness, and above all, it was done with respect to what they call the first commandment out there at Fort Meade, NSA: thou shalt not collect information, eavesdrop on Americans without a court warrant. That was the rule. That was the first commandment. When Cheney came in, he called General Hayden, who was head of NSA at the time, he said, "General Hayden, I know about that first commandment at NSA. I know about that. Forget about it. Forget about it." And that was before 9/11.
So the decision for the NSA to begin collecting information on everyone and everything started with an order from above.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it was Dick Cheney and George Bush. The other thing, of course, that needs to be said is that the technology allowed that for the first time. And so when you had the sort of the rubric here, collect everything, which clearly is their motto now, collect everything. And then they say, well, what people say, what about the problem with the haystack, finding a needle in a haystack? Well, the answer to that, they say, is you got to make sure you had the whole haystack.
This NSA document leaked by Ed Snowden describes their collection program this way: collect it all, sniff it all, know it all, process it all, exploit it all. NSA whistleblower Russ Tice says the agency is still downplaying its collecting process to make it sound harmless.
They're lying about what they have and their capabilities and what they're doing. They're archiving everything. Their idea is, we'll archive everything. We're going to take everything. And then they say, oh, well, we don't collect. Well, then they're lying, of course, but their definition of collect is to have some human analyst look at this email or listen to this phone call or whatever. Well, of course, that's nonsense. They've collected it, and they have it for for an indefinite period of time, but they're not going to call it collected until someone looks at it. And of course, there's no way we have enough humans on this planet to listen to every communication that happens.
They are also not talking about how collecting everything makes it harder to produce relevant intelligence. Is there a danger of valuable information getting lost because so much is collected? I mean, this is what they said after 9/11. They had information about these hijackers, but nothing was done because there was so much information they couldn't figure out who to go after.
And the Boston bombers and the underwear bombers and the shoe bombers, all these things, because they say you got to look for a needle in the haystack. Well, part of my job in that world was to make sure to first limit the size of the haystack. That way you don't have as much hay to go through to look for the needle. And what they're doing is just dumping on more hay. You don't have a haystack anymore. You have a mountain of hay to go through.
State surveillance today is now cheap, it's undetectable, it's pervasive, and it's available at the click of a mouse. As a result, entire populations, rather than individuals, now live under constant surveillance.
Whistleblower Ed Snowden went through that hay and saw a lot of disturbing images, wars, and abuses. As a network administrator, he had access to all the databases and soon realized that he had the power to spy on anyone. In a video prepared for a televised debate, he explained.
Despite policy, I, as an NSA analyst sitting at my desk, had the technical authority to wiretap anyone, from a federal judge to the President of the United States, without getting out of my chair, as long as I had a private email address. And that's not a boast. In fact, some of these cases have already happened. In 2009, the New York Times reported that an NSA analyst used our state surveillance infrastructure to improperly access Bill Clinton's email. And other NSA workers have used state surveillance to spy on their lovers, ex-girlfriends, and other individuals who are obviously not suspected of any crime at all or any kind of wrongdoing. It's important to note that none of those individuals were ever charged with crimes. And we have to ask ourselves, why is that?
Journalist Glenn Greenwald has now released some of Snowden's documents in his new book that confronts the NSA head-on.
The same rhetoric is constantly invoked, which is if you shine a light on what we in political power are doing in a way that we haven't authorized you to do, you're going to have blood on your hands. I mean, there's an obvious irony to being accused by a U.S. general who served in Iraq, of all places, of having blood on your hands or causing the death of innocent people. Nobody could ever surpass Keith Alexander and his fellow generals in their ability to do that.
What we've seen is a expansion of what we call secret law, where they're either working under authorities that the American public doesn't know about, or even worse, there is a law in the books, but they're interpreting it in a way that an objective reading of that law wouldn't ordinarily allow.
The NSA in the hot seat. Documents leaked by Edward Snowden show that the NSA may have been spying on Chancellor Angela Merkel. An old mobile phone number she used is listed in those documents. Germany not happy.
Soon, thanks to the Snowden disclosures and media investigations, we found out that the NSA was collecting intel on 122 foreign leaders, even U.S. allies, like the Chancellor of Germany and the President of Brazil. 35 leaders had their calls monitored.
For Germany, it is unacceptable that the mobile phone of our Federal Chancellor may have been subject to surveillance activities by our American partners. For us, spying on close friends and partners is totally unacceptable.
The NSA speaks of its work in neutral and non-threatening language, using terms like collection, telephony metadata. What does that mean? We asked former FBI undercover agent Mike German.
I mean, you would normally think in the terms of the Fourth Amendment that any time the government is collecting information about you, gathering it, putting it in a government database, that would be collection. But often the way the authorities that govern government surveillance are interpreted, sometimes the acquisition of information versus the collection of information are two different things, and they're only considering it collected once a human being has actually put eyes on it and processed the information.
In May 2014, former NSA Director Michael Hayden shocked a Washington audience when he said that the NSA uses metadata to kill people, a reference to NSA providing intelligence to military units using drones to assassinate people the Pentagon and the White House consider enemies. Hayden quickly backtracked, saying, "We don't do that in the U.S."
Okay? We kill people based on metadata. But that's not what we do with this metadata. Okay?
Thankfully. Wow, I was working up a sweat there for a second.
Hayden, now working with a former Homeland Security chief, was also embarrassed in October 2013 when he was overheard by a fellow train passenger who began tweeting the content of his confidential phone conversation. Using a secret FISA court to do its bidding, the NSA pressed the government to order phone companies like Verizon, AT&T, Sprint, and Nextel to turn over a massive number of records. Later we learned about a program called PRISM. Here's the secret NSA document that shows what it does to collect Internet data. Virtually everything we do and say online from all the big companies.
Well, they're collecting everything they can collect, and that is everything. They've been doing that without any adult supervision. The White House, the committees in Congress who are supposed to be exercising oversight, right? They're the overlook committees, not the oversight committees, and they're complicit in that. Not only that, but you have these 15 faux judges from the FISA court, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act court.
Faux means phony, right?
Yeah, F-A-U-X, yeah. And so what you have, Danny, and this is important, the first time in my life, you have the executive, you have important people in the legislative branch, the heads of the intelligence committees, and you have 15 judges on the FISA court, all sort of enmeshed, all complicit in this gross violation of the Fourth Amendment. And you start out asking about NSA, what it stands for? Now it stands for no such amendment. No such amendment.
Just to summarize, what is NSA? NSA is the largest, most costly, and most technologically sophisticated spy organization the world has ever known. It filters millions of phone calls and emails an hour. It has computers programmed to watch for hundreds of thousands of names. Its computers cost tens of millions and carry strange names like Black Widow. They run at special speeds most of us have never heard of, hundreds of teraflops that can lead to hundreds of trillions of operations per second. NSA headquarters is 4 times bigger than the U.S. Capitol.
I love the place. I went into the military and the Air Force when Ronald Reagan was president. I was full throttle. We were fighting the Cold War against the evil Soviet Union, and I was a full believer. I mean, I was gung ho, and you know, I'd be the guy that would get in early and stay late, and you know, I wanted to do my job, and I loved the place.
Russ Tice typified the NSA mentality. A space engineer, he believed in their clandestine mission and was totally dedicated. He worked in super-secret so-called Black World programs until he discovered that the satellites were not just spying on America's enemies.
In one of these programs, I found out that we were using satellite technology to spy on American citizens.
Spy on American citizens?
Yes.
You're not supposed to do that, right?
No. In NSA, every 6 months, you go through a program where they drill it into your head, we call it UCID 18, that you will not spy on Americans, and for one incident of spying on Americans, you can go to jail for 5 years, for one incident. And they drill that into your head, and we all believe that we will never do this to our fellow citizens.
William Binney was a 40-year veteran of NSA who also went off the reservation because he saw the agency straying from its job. He was interviewed by Democracy Now!
The Congress and the administration have been fed by the intelligence community what I call techno-babble. In other words, they're being bamboozled into thinking a certain way, that they have to do this in order to get terrorists, and that's simply false.
Speaking of terrorists, the most dramatic NSA story we heard came from Thomas Drake, who became an executive at NSA on the day of a terrorist attack, September 11th, 2001.
Almost 3,000 people were murdered. The workforce knew that this was not just a passing crisis. The workforce knew that we had utterly failed the nation. We under the Constitution, the preamble of the Constitution, government has 2 primary responsibilities: One is to provide for the common defense, the other is to provide for the general welfare. Here we utterly failed. We had not kept people out of harm's way. We had not protected the nation.
There was a feeling of guilt there because the NSA had information on some of the men who skyjacked those planes that were flown into buildings, but they did not share it with other agencies. Thomas Drake became an eyewitness to how the agency changed.
So I became eyewitness to NSA unchaining itself with the approval and the mandate of the White House, unchaining itself from the Fourth Amendment. Literally, and entering into a mass surveillance regime, the likes that history has never seen before.
As he became critical of the agency's failures, he became a whistleblower and faced years in prison for going public with NSA failures. Unlike Edward Snowden, he did not leak masses of documents.
That was one of the fundamental rules, whether it was oral communication, whether it was written, electronic, or later on even in hard copy, it was all unclassified, period.
What's not appreciated is that Snowden has been as careful in assembling information as he has been in disseminating information.
If I had just wanted to harm the U.S., you know, that you could shut down the surveillance system in an afternoon. But that's not my intention, and I think for anyone making that argument, they need to think, if they were in my position, and you know, you live a privileged life, you're living in Hawaii, in paradise, and making a ton of money, what would it take to make you leave everything behind?
Thanks to what we've learned from Snowden's disclosures, it seems like all of us have been reduced to the data we convey.
When you engage in an electronic transaction, whether it's with your cell phone, with a regular traditional landline phone, with your credit card, with your computer, the transaction itself, the content of the communications is called content. You know, if you buy something at the store with your credit card, what you bought is considered content. But there are all sorts of electronic trails left, like crumbs, that often have a tremendous amount of very detailed information about you, particularly when it's gathered in mass. For example, who you called, when you called them, how long you were on the call with them, where you made the call from. That type of data collected in mass can reveal an awful lot of information about you.
In May 2014, Washington finally took legal action against cyber spying. By China, not the United States, even as some of the Snowden documents revealed that economic espionage is also in NSA's portfolio. The Chinese and U.S. critics laughed at what they called hypocrisy.
The United States deliberately made up facts, using the excuse of so-called stealing of secrets online to indict 5 Chinese military officials. This has seriously violated the basic principles of international relations and damaged Chinese-US cooperation and mutual trust.
Americans think it's okay if we spy on foreigners, but it's not okay if we spy on Americans, as if, you know, the rest of the world has no right to privacy at all.
We are more worried about Al-Qaeda than I think any nation state as a threat to American lives. But nonetheless, I think we have to rein in an agency that has the ability to spy on any innocent citizen with impunity of any country in the world. I mean, when the world becomes the NSA's panopticon, even with a fig leaf of privacy around Americans, that to me does seem unacceptable, and it turns the whole world against us.
Coming up next, the NSA and the press, how spying and intimidation has led America's mainstream media to push back and publish leaks and disclosures that would have once been unthinkable. The press versus the NSA. The New York Times is considered America's most powerful newspaper. Its offices near Manhattan's Times Square projects that power for a media institution that often sets the political agenda and tells us what's important. And yet today, there is also fear and loathing inside New York Times newsrooms, where journalists increasingly feel threatened, even intimidated, by an administration that has prosecuted more whistleblowers, 8 in all, than any other in American history. In March 2014, the Times Conference Center hosted a forum to address the state of press freedom. Packed, it was like a media summit of major players there to resist the growing power of the surveillance state. Distributed at the event was this 2014 report on attacks on the press. The Committee to Protect Journalists charges that the NSA puts journalists under a cloud of suspicion. We're at the New York Times Center in Manhattan for a conference on sources and secrets. Some of the top journalists in America are here to debate and discuss the growth of the surveillance state in America. Journalists feel threatened. Politicians now feel threatened. This seems to be an issue that's gone from the back pages to the front page. Ralph Engelman works with the Polk Awards, sponsoring a respected awards ceremony in an industry that is far more competitive than collaborative.
Confidentiality of sources is central to the work of journalists, investigative journalists in particular. And in addition to the use of the Espionage Act, what we've learned from the Snowden revelations about the NSA, how can you guarantee confidentiality?
Engelman sees this event not just as a get-together for reporters, but one with an important political mission.
I think there is something that has not been said directly that needs to be said, and that is that the sort of political context for this whole crisis in terms of journalism and surveillance and the use of the Espionage Act of 1917. If you go back to the original Act of 1917, it was passed in large measure to suppress anti-war sentiment against U.S. entry into the war, First World War. It's not simply a question of journalistic practice, but it's also a question of American foreign policy, the ability of journalists and the public to follow what's going on.
At issue today is the case of James Risen, a Times reporter who exposed warrantless wiretapping.
You know, so after we had reported on the story and nailed it down, we went to the government for comment. In fact, I went to Michael Hayden, who was then the director of the NSA, and got him on the phone and told him what we were writing. And before he realized what he was doing, he had given me an on-the-record comment. And then, very quickly after that, he and the Bush administration started putting pressure on my editors, demanding that we not run the story.
Former veteran CIA analyst Ray McGovern says that at first there was an effort to suppress Risen's story.
James Risen had this story in the summer of 2004. It was that Dick Cheney and George Bush had told General Hayden to collect everything and forget about this First Amendment at NSA, about not collecting on Americans by the court, or just collect everything, okay? Now, that was discovered in the summer of 2004, but the New York Times superiors of James Risen went to the White House and said, and the election is coming up, and so George Bush said, don't, that's national security, terrorism, fear, national security, do not publish that story.
The Times initially sat on the report, but then Risen told his boss, publisher Arthur Sulzberger, that this story will be told in his new book. The Times publisher then told the White House the newspaper would be going ahead.
And so Sulzberger calls the White House and says, I'm sorry, we're going to have to publish on that now. Bush orders him into the Oval Office to tell him, no, you can't do that.
He orders the publisher of the New York Times into the White House.
Right. And the publisher of the New York Times and the Washington bureau chief dutifully show up there, and Bush says, you can't do that. Okay, now this is the 5th of December, 2005. You can't do that, okay? And they said, well, you know, hey, we held off for 15 months, for God's sake, you know. You got to understand. So what happened here is that the New York Times caved, and Michael Hayden was asked to explain all this in January of 2006, so 1 month after Reisen's revelations. He gets up before the National Press Club, and he's asked by Jonathan Landy, it's right on YouTube, General Hayden, why is it that you have sort of played fast and loose with the Fourth Amendment?
Fourth Amendment actually protects all of us against unreasonable search and seizure.
But
that's what it says.
The measure is probable cause, I believe.
The amendment says unreasonable search and seizure.
But does it not say probable?
No.
But the NSA director was wrong. Probable cause is in the Fourth Amendment. But Reisen is still being ordered by the courts to reveal his source, and he's resisting, leading to an ongoing clash and a possible jail term.
They're trying to kind of create a path for accepted reporting, and that if you as a reporter go outside those parameters, that you'll be punished, and that the sources that you are trying to deal with will be prosecuted.
Media old-timers like retired Times editor Seymour Topping sees a larger context too.
We're living in a period of terrorism, of danger on questions affecting national security, and therefore the whole question of the role of the press becomes, and its relationship with the government becomes more and more important. It's important that the public become more and more aware of the problems confronting the press.
Journalists in the building, like Bill Kovich and other former Times bureau chief, were also very conscious of what happened to another building in New York, the World Trade Center, creating the pretext for the rise of massive government spying.
When the Trade Center went down, all bets were off. Who was going to challenge the government? Nobody was. We didn't do it. The press didn't do it. The government had the opportunity, and George W. Bush opened all the doors.
So fast forward to the present day, we have situations where newspapers like the one you work for here are actually willing to work with whistleblowers and bring out information that maybe in the past they wouldn't have done as quickly, although we do have the Pentagon Papers.
And I helped work on the Pentagon Papers. We were ready to do it. The Times was ready to do it at any time if they could confirm the information. You know, we got the Pentagon Papers dumped, but we rented 2 floors of a hotel over here for a month and vetted that data ourselves, so we did our own reporting.
Mr. Ehrlichman, are you telling me that the break-in to Dr. Fielding's office was to satisfy the President of the United States?
The President wanted very much to make sure that a thing like this could not happen again. How one learned whether Ellsberg acted alone, as a disgruntled employee of a think tank, whether he acted as a member of an international spy ring delivering secrets to a foreign embassy, or just what his role was, where he fit, had to be determined, in the opinion of the investigators, by every available means.
Did you have a sense of mission, which is unusual in journalism, a sense of, you're actually uncovering something of value and importance to the American people?
That's the only reason to be a journalist. I mean, democracy, you know as well as I do, democracy only survives on a population that has the kind of information that allows them to make a decision to help make a democracy work. And if the press doesn't do it, who will?
This is not just an American problem. Journalists in other countries are being spied on too, by the NSA and their own intelligence agencies, says Tim McNulty.
If you look at journalists in other countries, they risk a great deal more than we risk. We may be, prosecuted, or we may end up with adverse publicity or things like that, but we rarely feel that our lives are threatened, that our livelihoods are threatened, that our families. The journalists in many other countries are not only more aggressive, they're more courageous.
This Sources and Secrets conference included exchanges with representatives of the intelligence community who argued that whistleblowers like Edward Snowden should be in prison.
It is my personal opinion, Jim Risen called me out on this, that people who leak classified information commit crimes, and if we can catch them, which is not always easy, we ought to prosecute them and they ought to go to jail.
Here's Robert Litt, who is general counsel for the Director of National Intelligence.
There are many, many things that the government believes need to be kept secret in the national interest. And there's a full recognition of the fact that the press is almost invariably going to balance that interest different than the government does. And so there's going to be necessarily an adversarial relationship. And the question is, what kind of processes can we set up to ensure that that adversarial relationship is a productive one rather than a destructive one?
The panels also included journalists who have been disseminating and publishing secrets leaked by Snowden, like the Washington Post's Barton Gellman, and independents like Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras.
Edward Snowden is a rock star to some. To others, of course, he is a traitor. And here today, via Skype, we have the three journalists who were entrusted by Snowden, chosen by Snowden, to be the recipients of top secret NSA archives. Do you feel it's essential? Do you systematically run by the government, ask for government response on the stories you've done on the Snowden revelations or other stories about the NSA?
We've had a legal framework since, I don't know, the Alien and Sedition Acts and the Espionage Act of 97 years ago, with which a government could prosecute journalists for talking about secrets. And it has been a legal culture, a political culture, that's created the barriers to that.
Greenwald and Poitras have worked directly with leading newspapers to report secrets buried in these documents.
He did not think that he should be in the position to decide which documents ought to be published and which ones ought to be suppressed. He came to well-established and well-regarded newspapers and asked the journalists in those institutions with whom he was working to make those judgments about what is in the public interest to publish and what is not. And specifically, at least to me, said, a lot of what I'm giving you is for background, for context, for understanding. But I don't think all of this should be published. If I just wanted all of this published, I wouldn't need you guys. I could have just uploaded it to the internet myself.
The thing that has, I think, been positive in terms of Snowden's disclosures is that it's reawakened an adversarial press, and that people have been shocked that these decisions about surveillance have been made completely in secret, completely without public debate. And that there does seem to be some kind of an awakening, but I wouldn't call it a shift of the pendulum.
And now, an initially skeptical American media has showered them with top prizes. Greenwald, Poitras, and Gellman won the admired Polk Awards. The next question: would the media honor Edward Snowden's contribution as a whistleblower? In the end, they didn't, but newspapers that carried his leaks did win the even more prestigious Pulitzer Prize. These reports were not always picked up or praised because establishment journalism does not trust crusaders like Greenwald and Poitras, says Rory O'Connor of Stony Brook University.
Because they're too independent, and because even as you heard, the editors of the top publications here, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and New Yorker, and so on, all of them said on the panels today, in fact, that they have not been aggressive enough, that they have collaborated perhaps too much with the government in the past. These are the people who run the major media organizations being self-critical and saying, no, we don't need to have more humility, which is what was suggested by Mr. Litt, the representative of the NSA and the CIA. He said that the press needed more humility. I was pleased at least that the leaders of the mainstream organizations struck back against that and said, no, we don't need more humility, we need more aggressive reporting, and I agree with that.
Before the big prize was given, publications like the magazine Politico framed the challenge facing the powers who run establishment journalism. Wrote media critic Dylan Byers, Honoring the NSA reporting would inevitably be perceived as a political act, with the Pulitzer Committee invoking its prestige on behalf of one side in a bitter national argument. Yet to pass on the NSA story would be to risk giving the appearance of timidity. The major media resolved the debate this way. They recognized the Snowden disclosures without recognizing him or the people closest to him. Snowden was magnanimous, saying today's decision is a vindication for everyone who believes that the public has a role in government. We owe it to the efforts of brave reporters and their colleagues who keep working in the face of extraordinary intimidation. Ben Weisner, Snowden's lawyer from the American Civil Liberties Union, also praised the press.
I do think that the last year in particular has been an extraordinary year for journalists, particularly American journalists, that they have been courageous in standing up in the face of government claims of national security. That they have not ignored those government claims. They have redacted stories where appropriate, but in general, they understood that the balance had tipped far too much towards deference.
As the big media now recognize the value of whistleblowers in the press, other media outlets say they have to be more aggressive in their own reporting and not just rely on documents that are leaked. Jonathan Landay is an investigative reporter for the Washington Bureau of McClatchy Newspapers.
I don't email sources. We just broke the story on the big fight between the CIA and the Senate Intelligence Committee. Most of the groundbreaking work on that was done by a 22-year-old paid freelancer who did nothing but doorstep committees on the Hill, go to people's homes, got me doing that again, going out at night to visit people, and that's how we were able to do that without sort of like sitting in the office and taking phone calls.
The issues at this conference on the rights of the press also deal with another right, the right of the public to be informed about what governments do in their name. That's the focus of Amy Goodman's concern. Goodman is an anchor of a popular independent daily newscast called Democracy Now!
Information is the oxygen of a democracy. It's not just about participating in democratic processes. It's about being informed. That's what makes democracy meaningful. And when we don't have that information, when a very powerful entity, the government, has the information and the people don't, that is not a very healthy sign. It does not bode well for democracy.
Goodman is a strong believer in the Freedom of Information Act that guarantees access to government information when the act is respected. She cites one current example of the government insisting on keeping secret something that happened 60 years ago. The issue is the U.S. role, if any, in the arrest of South Africa's late leader Nelson Mandela in 1962. Ryan Shapiro, an MIT graduate student, is now suing for the information after the government turned down his request.
Ryan Shapiro, the graduate student at MIT, has sued for more information under the Freedom of Information Act than anyone in U.S. history. And one of the issues he cares deeply about is what happened to Nelson Mandela? How was it that he was picked up in the early 60s? Was it just the South African government, or was Nelson Mandela targeted by the CIA and intelligence given over to the South African apartheid regime? And why is it that something that took place more than half a century ago we can't learn about today? That is a very serious question. That doesn't have to do with national security. That has to do with embarrassment, and that is not acceptable.
In the end, this is a fight to keep the public informed.
You don't just achieve democracy. People have to fight for it every single day, have to be ever vigilant. So now that the information is out there, and we don't even have all of the information, people have to decide what they want to do, how much power they want to imbue in the government.
So what will come from calls to action like Amy Goodman's and mainstream media conferences decrying the problem?
I think nothing will come out of events like this, honestly, to answer your question. The final panel was entitled, "Where do we go from here?" but actually there was very, very little of anyone addressing where we go from here. We're at a state here in the United States right now where the press is under attack by the Obama administration, a greater attack than any previous administration. In fact, than all previous administrations rolled together. And so the question is, where does the media go from here, faced with this attack, faced with the threat of further imprisonment on the part of Times reporters like Jim Risen? The mainstream media themselves are under attack. And I think that one thing I'm hoping you're going to see is a greater unity among the media.
NSA whistleblowers like Russ Tice say that the NSA at first labeled him paranoid to discredit him with the press.
Paranoid is right. They used paranoid. And they did it on purpose, I think, because they realized that if I ever did go to the press, that's exactly what they would say to the press. Because remember, back then, there aren't any, I'm the original NSA, whistleblower with this sort of thing. This is, 2004, 2005 time frame. So, when I finally did come out, that's exactly what they did. They said, you're talking to a crazy guy. Do you want your source to be the crazy guy?
So in other words, even though you had information and speculation that was informed, they basically attempted to discredit you.
Well, of course, yes.
But now whistleblowers are fighting back by working together and getting society and the media to recognize their contribution. Another recent award named after Ron Ridenour, a soldier who exposed the My Lai massacre in Vietnam, in which U.S. soldiers slaughtered villages and children, saluted Ed Snowden and the reporters bringing his documents to the public.
I'm very happy to be here, very honored to be here to make this introduction to two extraordinary people, Laura Poitras and Edward Snowden.
Author James Bamford, the first to expose NSA activities, introduced the winners. A live message by Ed Snowden, now living in exile in Russia, was heard.
Do you think it's right that the NSA is collecting more information about Americans in America than it is about Russians in Russia? Because that's what our systems do. We watch our own people more closely than we watch any other population in the world. Despite the protections, they are policy-based. The technical systems ingest and collect everyone in this room's communication. When you pick up the phone, when you make a call, when you make a purchase, when you buy a book, all of that is collected, and I could see it at my desk crossing my screen.
Former CIA analyst Ray McGovern says that journalists are not the only ones who fear the power of the NSA.
But then you ask about the journalists. You're asking about, well, everybody's afraid. I mean, it's not just the journalists. It's people like Barack Obama. It's people like Dianne Feinstein. Think about what the NSA has on Dianne Feinstein and her husband, who has made billions from defense and post office and all kinds of nice, cozy contracts, okay? So everybody's afraid, not just journalists.
Let me just understand this. You're saying that President Obama, in your opinion, informed opinion, has reasons to fear the power of the NSA, has to be careful in terms of the dance he's done about, yes, he'll reform it, but not too much.
Well, Danny, when you're collecting everything on everybody, who among us is as pure as Caesar's wife, Everybody's got something to hide. That's the idiocy of these people that say, I got nothing to hide, Well, everyone has things they want to hide.
Coming up next in our surveillance series, the interface between the spy agencies and the technology companies. Can their cooperation be considered complicity in spying? Do they violate the trust of customers? Next.